Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished checking on her last patient of the night shift. The pediatric ward at City General Hospital was finally quiet, with most of the children fast asleep. She had been working as a registered nurse for 8 years, and her colleagues knew her as the gentle, caring woman who always volunteered for the hardest cases. What they didn't know was that every weekend, Sarah transformed into someone completely different. 3 months ago, Sarah had received a phone call that changed everything. Her younger brother Miguel, a photojournalist, had been kidnapped while documenting drug cartel activities near the Mexican border. The kidnappers demanded $2 million for his release. Sarah knew her family could never raise that kind of money. The police seemed helpless, and private security companies wanted more money than they had. That's when Sarah remembered her military training. Before becoming a nurse, Sarah had served as a Marine Corps sniper for 6 years. She had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan, where she earned a reputation as one of the most accurate marksmen in her unit. Her record showed 47 confirmed kills, all from distances over 800 meters. When she left the military, she swore she would never pick up a rifle again. She wanted to save lives, not take them. That's why she became a nurse. But Miguel's kidnapping changed everything. Sarah knew the police couldn't help her brother, and hiring professionals was impossible. She would have to rescue him herself, using the deadly skills she had tried so hard to forget. For 3 months, she had been planning and preparing in secret. Every weekend, Sarah drove to an abandoned ranch, 2 hours outside the city. She had rented the property under a false name, paying cash to avoid any paper trail. The ranch had a main house, several outbuildings, and most importantly, open land that stretched for miles in every direction. It was perfect for what she needed to do. Sarah had spent thousands of dollars on equipment. She bought a custom-built sniper rifle, identical to the one she had used in the Marines. She purchased body armor, night vision equipment, tactical clothing, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. She also bought medical supplies, knowing that her nursing skills might be just as important as her shooting ability. The hardest part was the physical training. Sarah had stayed in good shape since leaving the military, but she needed to be in peak condition for what she was planning. She ran 10 miles every morning before work, lifted weights during her lunch breaks, and practiced shooting every weekend. Her accuracy was coming back quickly. Last weekend, she had hit 20 consecutive targets at 1,200 meters. Sarah had also been gathering intelligence about her brother's captors. Through her contacts in the nursing community, she had met Dr. Elena Vasquez, who ran a medical clinic near the border. Dr. Vasquez treated many victims of cartel violence, and she had heard rumors about where Miguel might be held. The information was dangerous to obtain, but Dr. Vasquez agreed to help after learning about Miguel's situation. According to Dr. Vasquez, Miguel was being held at a compound owned by the Sangre Nueva cartel, about 50 miles south of the border. The compound was heavily guarded, with at least 20 armed men providing security. It was built like a fortress, with high walls, guard towers, and only one entrance. Most people would consider it impossible to penetrate. But Sarah wasn't most people. She had studied the compound through satellite imagery and drone surveillance footage that Dr. Vasquez had obtained through her medical contacts. She had identified weak points in the security, potential sniper positions, and escape routes. She had even managed to get the layout of the buildings inside the compound from a construction worker who had helped build it years ago. Tonight was Sarah's last shift before taking 2 weeks of vacation time. She had told her supervisor that she needed time to deal with a family emergency, which wasn't exactly a lie. Tomorrow, she would drive to a safe house near the border and begin the most dangerous mission of her life. As Sarah finished her rounds, she thought about the patients she was leaving behind. There was 8-year-old Tommy, recovering from a heart surgery. There was Maria, a teenager fighting leukemia with incredible bravery. There was baby David, born 3 months premature, but gaining weight every day. These children depended on her, trusted her to keep them safe, and help them heal. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. During the day, she used her hands to heal and comfort. Soon, she would use those same hands to kill. She tried to convince herself that she was doing the right thing. Miguel was innocent. He had been kidnapped while trying to expose the truth about cartel violence. The men holding him were murderers who had destroyed countless families. They deserved whatever happened to them, but deep down, Sarah knew that crossing this line would change her forever. Once she picked up that rifle again, once she started killing, she could never go back to being the same person. The gentle nurse who sang lullabies to scared children would be gone, replaced by someone harder and more dangerous. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dr. Vasquez. New information. Miguel moved to different location. More secure. Call me. Sarah's heart sank. 3 months of planning might be worthless if Miguel had been moved. She quickly called Dr. Rai Vasquez from a secure phone she had bought specifically for this mission. They moved him yesterday. Dr. Vasquez explained. My source says he's now being held at a ranch about 30 miles east of the original location. It's smaller but more isolated. Only 10 guards instead of 20. Can you get me details about this new location? Sarah asked. I'm working on it. But, Sarah, there's something else. My source says they're planning to execute Miguel in 72 hours. They've given up on getting the ransom money. They want to make an example of him to scare other journalists. Sarah felt a cold rage building inside her. 72 hours. She would have to move faster than planned, with less preparation and incomplete intelligence. It was exactly the kind of hasty operation that got soldiers killed. But she had no choice. Send me everything you can find about the new location, Sarah said. I'm leaving tonight. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, staring at her hands. These hands had saved so many lives over the years. They had held dying children, comforted grieving parents, and brought healing to countless patients. Tomorrow, they would hold a rifle and bring death to anyone who stood between her and her brother. Sarah thought about her parents, who had died in a car accident when she and Miguel were teenagers. They had sacrificed everything to give their children a better life in America. Miguel had become a journalist to honor their memory by exposing injustice and truth. Sarah had become a nurse to honor their memory by healing and caring for others. Now she was about to become a killer again. Sarah started her car and drove home to her small apartment. She had already packed everything she needed for the mission. Her equipment was loaded in a storage unit across town, ready to be moved to her vehicle. She had written letters to her supervisor, her closest friends, and her patients' families to be delivered if she didn't come back. The apartment felt strange and empty, like she was already a ghost. Sarah looked at the photos on her walls, pictures of her with patients who had recovered, images from medical missions she had participated in, graduation photos from nursing school. This was the life she was leaving behind, possibly forever. In her bedroom closet, hidden behind a panel she had installed herself, were items from her other life. Her military medals, commendation letters, and photos from Afghanistan. There was also a picture of her sniper team, taken just before their last mission together. 3 of the 5 men in that photo had died in the war. Sarah had survived by being smarter, more careful, and more deadly than her enemies. She would need all of those skills to save Miguel and survive what was coming. Sarah packed a small bag with civilian clothes and personal items. Everything else she needed was already in the storage unit. As she prepared to leave, she took one last look around the apartment. When she returned, if she returned, nothing would be the same. The drive to the border would take 8 hours. Sarah planned to arrive at Dr. Team Vasquez's clinic just after dawn, get the latest intelligence about Miguel's location, and then begin her surveillance of the target. She would spend the day studying the ranch where her brother was being held, identifying guard positions and patrol patterns. The rescue would happen tomorrow night, under cover of darkness. Sarah planned to eliminate the guards silently, extract Miguel, and escape across the border before anyone knew what had happened. It sounded simple when she thought about it that way, but Sarah knew that no mission ever went according to plan. As she drove through the night, Sarah tried to prepare herself mentally for what was coming. She thought about her first kill in Afghanistan, a Taliban sniper who had been picking off civilians in a marketplace. She remembered the weight of the rifle, the crosshairs settling on the target, the gentle squeeze of the trigger. The man had dropped instantly, never knowing what hit him. Sarah had felt sick after that first kill, despite knowing she had saved innocent lives. Her sergeant had told her that feeling sick was good, that it meant she was still human. The day you stop feeling anything is the day you become a monster, he had said. Over the next 6 years, Sarah had killed 46 more people. Each time she told herself she was protecting her fellow soldiers and innocent civilians. Each time, it became a little easier. By the end of her second tour, she barely felt anything at all. That's when she knew it was time to leave the military and find a new way to serve. Nursing had saved her soul. Working in the pediatric ward had reminded her what it meant to protect and nurture life. Every child she helped had been a small act of redemption for the lives she had taken. Over 8 years, Sarah had convinced herself that she was a different person, that the killer inside her was gone forever, but now she could feel that other person stirring, waking up after years of sleep. The predator that had made her one of the most feared snipers in the Marines was returning, and Sarah wasn't sure she could control it once it was fully awake. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of her, leading toward a confrontation that would determine not just Miguel's fate, but her own. Sarah pressed harder on the accelerator, racing toward a destiny she had tried so hard to escape. Behind her, the lights of the city faded into darkness. Ahead lay the border, where the gentle nurse would finally meet the deadly sniper, and only one of them would survive. Dawn broke over the dusty border town as Sarah pulled into the parking lot of Dr. Vasquez's clinic. The building was small and weathered, with barred windows and a faded sign in both English and Spanish. Sarah could already see a line of patients waiting outside, mostly women with small children and elderly men with the weathered faces of people who had worked hard their entire lives. Dr. Elena Vasquez was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much suffering. She had been running this clinic for 15 years, treating everyone who came through her doors regardless of their ability to pay. Many of her patients were victims of cartel violence, family members of the disappeared, refugees fleeing drug wars, and occasionally people who had information about cartel operations. Sarah entered through a side door that Dr. Vasquez had left unlocked for her. The interior of the clinic was clean but basic, with old equipment and supplies that had clearly been donated from larger hospitals. Despite the humble surroundings, Sarah could see that Dr. Vasquez ran an efficient operation. The walls were covered with children's drawings and thank you letters from grateful patients. "You look tired," Dr. Vasquez said as she led Sarah to her small office in the back of the clinic. "Did you drive all night?" "I had to. You said Miguel only has 72 hours. Sarah accepted a cup of strong coffee and sat down across from the doctor's desk. "What else have you learned about the new location?" Dr. Vasquez pulled out a folder filled with papers and photographs. "The ranch is called Las Tres Palmas. It's owned by a shell company connected to the Sangre Nueva cartel, but they use it as a safe house for high-value prisoners. My contact managed to get these satellite photos from 3 days ago." Sarah studied the images carefully. The ranch was much smaller than the original compound, with just 3 main buildings arranged around a central courtyard. The property was surrounded by open desert, which would make a stealthy approach difficult but would also limit the number of directions from which guards could come to help. "The main house is where they keep prisoners," Dr. Vasquez explained. "There's a bunkhouse for the guards and a separate building for vehicles and supplies. My contact counted 10 guards total, working in shifts of 5. They patrol the perimeter every 2 hours. "What about communications?" Sarah asked. "Radio, satellite phone, internet?" "They have a radio antenna on the main house and a satellite dish. Standard communication equipment for a remote operation. But here's the interesting part." Dr. Vasquez pulled out another photo. "See that building about 2 miles north of the ranch? That's a Mexican army checkpoint. The cartel pays them to look the other way, but it also means military reinforcements could arrive within 20 minutes if something goes wrong." Sarah felt a knot forming in her stomach. 20 minutes wasn't much time to extract Miguel and escape. She would need to work fast and avoid any prolonged firefight. "Tell me about the guards," Sarah said. "What kind of training do they have?" "Most are former soldiers or police officers, well-armed and experienced, but not elite troops. They're used to intimidating civilians and fighting other cartels, not dealing with military-trained operators." "Dr. Dossi," Vasquez paused. "Sarah, I have to ask. Are you sure you can do this alone? These men are dangerous, and there are 10 of them." Sarah looked at the photos again, her military training automatically assessing angles of fire, cover positions, and approach routes. "I've faced worse odds, and I have advantages they don't expect." They're not looking for a single sniper. They're expecting either a ransom payment or a large rescue force. Vasquez reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a cell phone. This belonged to one of my patients who escaped from cartel custody last month. It has the phone numbers for several people at Las Tres Palmas, including the ranch supervisor. If you can get close enough to use their communication equipment, you might be able to create some confusion. Sarah pocketed the phone and continued studying the intelligence. What about Miguel's condition? Have you heard anything about whether he's injured? My contact says he's alive but weak. They've been feeding him very little and keeping him in a small room without windows. He's been there for 3 days, so he's probably disoriented and may need medical attention. Dr. Kayasika. Vasquez looked concerned. You'll need to be prepared to treat injuries and help him travel quickly. I'm a nurse. I can handle whatever medical care he needs. Sarah stood up and gathered the photos. I need to get closer to the ranch and see it for myself. Is there somewhere I can observe from without being spotted? Dr. Vasquez pulled out a hand-drawn map. There's an old mining operation about 3 miles east of the ranch. It's been abandoned for years, but the access road is still passable. From the highest hill, you should be able to see the entire ranch with binoculars. Sarah memorized the route and prepared to leave. As she reached the door, Dr. Vasquez grabbed her arm. Sarah, I need you to understand something. If you're captured, they'll torture you for information before they kill you, and if you fail, they'll probably execute Miguel immediately as punishment. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Sarah looked into the doctor's worried eyes. Miguel is the only family I have left. I won't abandon him to these animals. She paused. But I understand the risks. If something goes wrong, don't blame yourself. You've already done more than anyone could ask. Sarah left the clinic and drove to a truck stop on the outskirts of town where she had arranged to meet her equipment supplier. The man was a former Marine who ran a security consulting business and asked no questions as long as the money was good. Sarah had purchased her gear through him using false identification and cash payments. The supplier, who went by the name Rodriguez, was waiting in the parking lot with a modified pickup truck. The vehicle looked ordinary from the outside, but Sarah knew it had been equipped with run-flat tires, armor plating, and a hidden compartment containing her weapons and equipment. Everything you ordered is in the truck, Rodriguez said as he handed her the keys. The rifle is zeroed at 800 meters, and I included extra ammunition in case you run into more trouble than expected. He paused. You sure you don't want backup? I know some guys who would help for the right price. This needs to be clean and quiet, Sarah replied. Too many people means too many things that can go wrong. Rodriguez nodded and walked away without another word. In his line of business, it was better not to know too much about what his customers were planning. Sarah drove the truck to a remote area and spent the next hour checking her equipment. The rifle was a custom-built weapon chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, identical to the one she had used in Afghanistan. The scope was military-grade with infrared capability for night shooting. She also had a suppressed pistol, body armor, night vision equipment, medical supplies, and enough food and water for 3 days. Everything was exactly as she had ordered, but touching the rifle again brought back memories Sarah had tried to forget. She remembered the weight of it in her hands, the smooth action of the bolt, the way it felt to be completely in control of life and death from a distance. For a moment she was back in Afghanistan, lying in the dust on a mountain ridge, waiting for a target to appear in her crosshairs. Sarah shook off the memories and loaded the truck. She had work to do. The drive to the old mining site took 2 hours over increasingly rough roads. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, with red rock formations rising from the desert floor and mountains visible in the distance. It was also completely empty. Sarah passed only one other vehicle during the entire journey, a Mexican army patrol that barely glanced at her truck. The abandoned mine was exactly as Dr. Vasquez had described. Rusted equipment and collapsed buildings dotted the hillside, while a network of dirt roads led to different excavation sites. Sarah drove to the highest point and parked behind the ruins of an old processing plant where her truck would be hidden from casual observation. Using military-grade binoculars, Sarah studied Las Tres Palmas Ranch for over an hour. The intelligence she had received was accurate. The 3 buildings were arranged around a central courtyard, with the main house clearly being the most substantial structure. Sarah could see guards walking regular patrols and identified 2 observation posts with good views of the surrounding desert. More importantly, Sarah could see exactly where she needed to position herself for the shot. There was a small hill about 1,200 meters north of the ranch that would give her a clear view of the entire compound. The distance was within her comfort zone, and the elevation would allow her to see over the perimeter wall. As Sarah watched, she began to understand the guards' routine. They changed shifts every 4 hours, with the new guards spending about 10 minutes talking to the men they were replacing. During these changeovers, attention would be divided and communication would be less efficient. Sarah also noticed something that wasn't in the intelligence reports. There was a small building separate from the others, about 50 meters from the main house. Through her binoculars, she could see that it had only 1 door and no windows. That had to be where Miguel was being held. The challenge would be getting from her shooting position to Miguel's location without being detected. The distance was over 1 kilometer, and most of it was open ground with no cover. Sarah would need to eliminate the guards quickly and move fast. As the sun began to set, Sarah saw something that changed her entire plan. A helicopter landed in the courtyard of the ranch, and several men got out. Even at this distance, Sarah could tell they were different from the regular guards. They moved with military precision and carried better equipment. Using a telephoto camera lens, Sarah took photos of the new arrivals. When she zoomed in on the images, her heart sank. These weren't ordinary cartel soldiers. They were professionals, probably former special forces or mercenaries. Their presence meant the rescue would be much more difficult than she had planned. Sarah watched until full darkness fell, counting at least 15 armed men now guarding the ranch. The odds had just gotten much worse, but she was committed to the mission. Miguel's execution was scheduled for tomorrow night. If she didn't act now, he would die. As Sarah prepared to move to her shooting position, her phone rang. It was Dr. Cilliam Vasquez. "Sarah, you need to get out of there immediately. My contact just called. The Mexican army is planning a raid on the ranch tomorrow morning. They received an anonymous tip about the location." Sarah felt a mix of hope and frustration. That's good news, isn't it? The army will rescue Miguel. No, you don't understand. The tip came from someone in the cartel. It's a trap. They're planning to execute all the prisoners before the army arrives, then blame the deaths on the raid. Miguel will be killed at dawn. Sarah's blood ran cold. Dawn was less than 8 hours away. She would have to move immediately in complete darkness against a force that had just been reinforced with professional soldiers. "Sarah? Are you there?" "I'm here," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear growing in her chest. "Thanks for the warning. I'll handle it. Please be careful. And remember, even if you save Miguel, you'll still need to get both of you out of the country alive." Sarah hung up the phone and looked toward the ranch, which was now brightly lit with floodlights. Somewhere in that compound, her brother was waiting to die. She was his only hope, and she had less than 8 hours to save him. Sarah loaded her rifle and checked her gear one final time. The gentle nurse was gone now, replaced by the deadly sniper who had once terrorized enemy forces in Afghanistan. As she prepared to move into position, Sarah made peace with what she was about to do. Tonight, she would kill again, and this time, she would enjoy it. Sarah moved through the desert like a ghost, using the darkness and her night vision equipment to navigate the rough terrain between the old mining site and her chosen shooting position. She had painted her face with camouflage paint and wore dark clothing that would blend with the shadows. Every piece of equipment was secured to prevent noise, and she moved with the fluid silence that had made her legendary among her fellow Marines. The hill she had selected was 1,247 meters from the ranch compound, according to her laser rangefinder. It was a challenging shot, but well within her capabilities. More importantly, the position offered multiple escape routes and good concealment among the rocks and sparse desert vegetation. Sarah set up her shooting position with practiced efficiency, creating a stable platform for her rifle and arranging her equipment for quick access. She had learned in Afghanistan that preparation was the difference between mission success and disaster. Every magazine was positioned exactly where she could reach it without looking. Her medical kit was readily accessible in case Miguel was injured. Her escape route was memorized and cleared of obstacles. Through her scope, Sarah could see the ranch compound clearly despite the darkness. The night vision capability revealed details that would be invisible to the naked eye. She counted 16 guards total, including the professionals who had arrived by helicopter. They were maintaining a regular patrol pattern, but their routes were predictable and their timing was sloppy. Sarah began by studying each guard individually, learning their habits and identifying their equipment. Most of the regular cartel soldiers carried AK-47 assault rifles and wore civilian clothing with tactical vests. The professionals were different. They had modern weapons, full military gear, and moved with the discipline of experienced soldiers. The leader of the professional team was easy to identify. He was a tall man with graying hair who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to command. Sarah watched him through her scope as he inspected the guards and checked security positions. This man would be her primary target once the shooting started. At 2:17 a.m., Sarah saw movement near the small building where Miguel was being held. Two guards approached the structure, one carrying what appeared to be food and water. They unlocked the door and disappeared inside for about 5 minutes before emerging again. This confirmed that Miguel was alive and gave Sarah important timing information about when the building would be accessible. Sarah also noticed something else during this observation. The guards were tired and becoming less alert as the night progressed. They were talking more, paying less attention to their sectors of responsibility, and generally showing signs of the fatigue that affects all soldiers during long periods of guard duty. At 3:30 a.m., Sarah began her final preparations. She chambered around and adjusted her scope for the current atmospheric conditions. The night was still and clear, with minimal wind that would not significantly affect her shots at this range. Temperature and humidity were within normal parameters for her rifle's ballistic profile. Sarah had planned her sequence of shots carefully. She would begin by eliminating the two guards in the observation towers, as they had the best view of the surrounding area and would be most likely to spot her muzzle flash. Next, she would target the professional soldiers, starting with their leader. Finally, she would deal with the remaining cartel guards while moving toward the compound. The suppressor on her rifle would reduce the sound signature of her shots, but would not eliminate it entirely. Sarah estimated she would have about 30 seconds after her first shot before the guards realized they were under attack. In that time, she needed to eliminate at least half of the enemy force. At 4:15 a.m., Sarah received a text message from Dr. Vasquez. Army units moving toward your position. ETA 90 minutes. This complicated the situation significantly. Sarah now had less than 90 minutes to complete the rescue and escape before Mexican Army forces arrived. If she was still in the area when they got there, she would likely be arrested or killed. The Army wouldn't distinguish between her and the cartel soldiers. Sarah made a decision. She would accelerate her timeline and begin the assault immediately. Every minute of delay reduced her chances of success and survival. Sarah settled into her shooting position and placed the crosshairs of her scope on the first target, a guard in the northern observation tower who was smoking a cigarette. The red glow of the tobacco made him an easy target even in the darkness. Sarah controlled her breathing just as she had been taught years ago in sniper school. In, out, half, in, hold. Gentle pressure on the trigger. Straight back, follow through. The rifle fired with a muffled crack that was barely audible at the ranch. The guard in the tower dropped instantly, killed by a bullet that struck him center mass. His body fell forward against the tower railing, but in the darkness, it would not be immediately obvious to the other guards that anything was wrong. Sarah worked the bolt of her rifle smoothly and acquired her second target, the guard in the southern tower. This man was more alert, constantly scanning the desert with binoculars. Sarah had to wait for him to lower the binoculars and present a clear shot. When the opportunity came, Sarah took it. Her second shot was even more precise than the first, striking the target in the head and killing him instantly. The guard slumped backward into the tower, completely out of view. 2 down, 14 to go. Sarah's third target was the leader of the professional soldiers, who was standing in the courtyard talking on a radio. This was a more challenging shot, due to the distance and the fact that the target was partially concealed by shadows. Sarah adjusted her aim point slightly and squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the man in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. Sarah could see through her scope that he was still moving, reaching for his radio. She fired again and the movement stopped. The death of their leader created immediate confusion among the professional soldiers. They began shouting and running toward his body, bunching up in a way that made them easy targets. Sarah took advantage of their mistake, firing rapidly and accurately. Her fourth shot dropped a soldier who was kneeling beside the leader's body. The fifth shot killed another man who was trying to take cover behind a vehicle. The sixth shot wounded a third soldier who crawled behind the main house screaming in pain. By now, the guards knew they were under attack, but they still hadn't located Sarah's position. Some were firing randomly into the desert, while others were trying to organize a defense. The remaining professional soldiers were shouting orders in Spanish and English, trying to maintain discipline among the increasingly panicked cartel guards. Sarah reloaded quickly and shifted her focus to the guards who were closest to Miguel's prison building. She could not allow them to execute her brother before she could reach him. 2 guards were running toward the small structure, probably planning to kill Miguel and eliminate evidence of his captivity. Sarah's 7th shot struck the first guard in the back, dropping him 10 meters from the building. Her 8th shot hit the second guard in the leg, causing him to fall but not killing him immediately. Sarah fired again, finishing him with a headshot. The courtyard of the ranch was now in complete chaos. Bodies lay scattered around the compound, and the surviving guards were firing in all directions. Some were trying to reach vehicles to escape, while others were attempting to organize a counterattack. Sarah had eliminated 8 of the 16 guards in less than 2 minutes, but now came the dangerous part. She needed to leave her concealed position and move across open ground to reach Miguel. Once she left the hill, she would lose her range advantage and would have to fight at close quarters against the remaining 8 guards. Sarah quickly packed her essential equipment and began moving down the hill toward the ranch. She left the heavy sniper rifle behind, carrying only her suppressed pistol, medical supplies, and extra ammunition. The desert was treacherous in the darkness, with loose rocks and hidden obstacles that could cause a fall and injury. As Sarah approached the perimeter of the compound, she could hear the guards shouting to each other, trying to coordinate their response to the attack. Most of them seemed to be taking defensive positions around the main house, probably assuming that a larger force would assault the compound directly. Sarah used this assumption to her advantage, approaching from an unexpected direction. Instead of coming from the north where her shots had originated, she circled around to the east and approached Miguel's prison building from the blind side. The door to the small structure was secured with a heavy padlock. Sarah pulled a set of bolt cutters from her pack and quickly cut through the metal. As she opened the door, she called out softly in Spanish, "Miguel, it's Sarah. I'm here to get you out." The interior of the building was pitch black, but Sarah could hear movement in the darkness. Using a small red filtered flashlight, she illuminated the space and saw her brother huddled in a corner. Miguel Martinez was barely recognizable. He had lost at least 30 pounds, and his face was covered with bruises. His clothes were filthy and torn, and Sarah could see that he had injuries to his hands and arms. But he was alive and conscious, which was all that mattered. "Sarah?" Miguel's voice was weak and confused. What are you doing here?" "I'm getting you out," Sarah said as she knelt beside him and began checking his injuries. "Can you walk?" "They haven't fed me much and my legs are weak, but I can try." Miguel struggled to his feet with Sarah's help. "There are men with guns everywhere. How are we going to get past them?" Sarah helped Miguel toward the door, supporting his weight as he struggled to walk. "Don't worry about the guards. Most of them are already dead." As they emerged from the building, Sarah could see that the situation in the compound had stabilized somewhat. The remaining guards had established defensive positions and were no longer running around in panic, but they were still focused on the main house and the northern perimeter, leaving the eastern section relatively undefended. Sarah guided Miguel toward a gap in the perimeter wall that she had identified during her reconnaissance. They moved slowly due to Miguel's weakened condition, staying in the shadows and avoiding the areas covered by the guards' fields of fire. When they were halfway to the wall, a guard rounded the corner of a building and spotted them. The man raised his rifle and shouted a warning to his comrades. Sarah reacted instantly, drawing her pistol and firing 3 suppressed rounds center mass. The guard dropped silently, but Sarah knew his shout had been heard. "Can you move faster?" Sarah asked Miguel as she helped him toward the wall. "I'll try," Miguel gasped, pushing himself to move more quickly despite his obvious pain and exhaustion. They reached the perimeter wall just as two more guards appeared from around the main house. Sarah pushed Miguel behind cover and engaged the guards with her pistol. The first man went down immediately, but the second took cover behind a vehicle and began returning fire with his assault rifle. The automatic weapons fire shattered the night air and alerted every remaining guard to their location. Sarah could hear men shouting and running in their direction. She had perhaps 60 seconds before they would be surrounded and overwhelmed. Sarah pulled a hand grenade from her vest and threw it toward the vehicle where the guard was taking cover. The explosion destroyed the car and eliminated the immediate threat, but it also announced their position to everyone in the compound. "We need to go now," Sarah said as she helped Miguel through a gap in the wall. "Can you run?" Miguel nodded, though Sarah could see he was already exhausted from the short distance they had traveled. They emerged from the compound into the open desert just as the remaining guards reached the perimeter wall behind them. Bullets began flying around them as the guards opened fire. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of rounds passing close to their heads. She returned fire with her pistol while helping Miguel move away from the compound, but their progress was agonizingly slow. In the distance, Sarah could see the lights of vehicles approaching from the north. The Mexican army units were arriving earlier than expected, probably drawn by the sound of gunfire and explosions. Sarah and Miguel were now caught between the surviving cartel guards behind them and military forces approaching from ahead. They had escaped the compound, but their ordeal was far from over. Sarah pulled Miguel behind a large boulder as bullets whined overhead. The cartel guards were pursuing them aggressively, and the approaching headlights meant Mexican army units would arrive within minutes. Sarah was caught in exactly the situation she had hoped to avoid, a running firefight with multiple enemy forces converging on her position. "I can't keep up," Miguel gasped, clutching his side where an old injury was causing him pain. "Leave me here and save yourself." "Shut up," Sarah said firmly as she checked her remaining ammunition. "I didn't come this far to abandon you now." She had 4 magazines left for her pistol and 2 grenades. Against the forces hunting them, it wasn't nearly enough. Sarah studied the terrain around them. The desert was relatively flat with scattered rocks and scrub vegetation that provided minimal cover. About 200 meters to the east, she could see the dark outline of an arroyo, a dry riverbed that would offer concealment and a potential escape route. "See that depression over there?" Sarah pointed toward the arroyo. "We're going to move from cover to cover until we reach it. When I say run, you run as fast as you can. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything." Miguel nodded weakly. Sarah could see that her brother was running on pure adrenaline and determination. His body was failing after months of captivity, but his spirit remained strong. Sarah waited until the guard's fire slackened, then grabbed Miguel's arm. "Go." They sprinted toward the next boulder, covering about 30 meters before the guards spotted them and resumed firing. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of at least 3 different weapons, which meant at least 3 guards were still pursuing them. More concerning was the growing noise from the approaching vehicles, which sounded like a substantial military force. At the second boulder, Sarah made a decision that went against every instinct she had developed as a sniper. Instead of continuing to retreat, she would attack. "Stay here and keep your head down," she told Miguel. "I'm going to eliminate our pursuit." "Sarah, no! There are too many of them!" But Sarah was already moving, circling around to the south to flank the guards who were advancing on their position. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, using the darkness and her superior training to become nearly invisible in the desert landscape. The first guard never saw her coming. Sarah approached from behind and eliminated him silently with her combat knife, taking his assault rifle and ammunition. Now she was properly armed for what was coming. The second guard was more alert, but Sarah's superior marksmanship quickly ended the threat. A short burst from the captured AK-47 dropped him before he could raise his own weapon. Sarah immediately rolled to a new position to avoid return fire from the third guard. The final pursuer was smarter than his companions. He had taken good cover behind a cluster of rocks and was firing disciplined bursts toward Sarah's last known position. Sarah couldn't get a clear shot without exposing herself to his fire. But Sarah had advantages the guard couldn't match. She had night vision equipment that allowed her to see clearly in conditions where he was nearly blind. She also had the patience and discipline that came from years of military training. Sarah waited, watching through her night vision scope as the guard gradually became more anxious about his isolated position. After 10 minutes, he made the mistake she had been waiting for. He left his cover to advance toward where he thought she was hiding. Sarah's burst of automatic fire caught him in the open, ending the immediate pursuit threat. But even as the guard fell, Sarah could see that her problems were far from over. The military vehicles had reached the ranch compound, and soldiers were already beginning to spread out into the surrounding desert. Sarah ran back to where Miguel was waiting behind the boulder. Her brother looked even weaker than before, and Sarah realized he was suffering from more than just exhaustion and hunger. His skin was pale and clammy, suggesting dehydration or internal injuries. "Can you make it to the arroyo?" Sarah asked. Miguel nodded, but Sarah could see the tremendous effort it took for him to stand. She supported most of his weight as they moved toward the dry riverbed, constantly watching for signs of pursuit from the military forces. The arroyo was deeper than it had appeared from a distance, with steep banks that would provide excellent concealment. Sarah helped Miguel down into the depression, where they could finally move without being silhouetted against the skyline. "We need to treat your injuries," Sarah said as she pulled medical supplies from her pack. "Tell me what hurts the most." "My ribs. I think some are broken. And my left shoulder has been dislocated for weeks." Miguel winced as Sarah examined him with gentle, professional hands. "They didn't feed us much, and the water was sometimes contaminated." Sarah quickly diagnosed Miguel's condition. He was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from at least 2 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. Under normal circumstances, he would need immediate hospitalization. But these weren't normal circumstances. "This is going to hurt," Sarah said as she prepared to reset Miguel's dislocated shoulder, "but it will feel better afterward." Sarah used a technique she had learned in military medical training, manipulating Miguel's arm until the shoulder joint snapped back into place. Miguel screamed once, then bit down on a piece of cloth to muffle any further sounds. "Good," Sarah said as she applied a makeshift sling to immobilize the shoulder. "Now I'm going to give you an IV to help with the dehydration. We need to get some fluids into you before we try to travel any further." Sarah established an IV line with practiced efficiency, using medical supplies she had included specifically for this possibility. The saline solution would help restore Miguel's fluid balance and give him energy for the difficult journey ahead. While the IV was running, Sarah studied their tactical situation. The arroyo extended generally eastward for several kilometers before joining a larger wash that led toward the border. If they could follow the drainage system, they might be able to avoid the military search teams and reach a point where her truck was hidden. But Miguel's condition was a serious problem. Even with medical treatment, he was in no shape for the kind of cross-country travel that would be required to evade capture. Sarah needed to find an alternative solution. Sarah's phone vibrated with an incoming text message. It was from Dr. Vasquez. "Army has surrounded ranch. Reports of multiple casualties. Are you safe?" Sarah quickly typed a response. "Extracted target. Need emergency extraction. Can you help?" The reply came within minutes. "Yes. Have contact with pilot who flies medical evacuations. Can pick you up but need exact location." Sarah checked her GPS coordinates and sent them to Dr. Vasquez, along with a description of their current position in the arroyo. If the doctor's pilot could reach them, it would solve their immediate transportation problem and get Miguel the medical care he desperately needed. But first, they had to survive long enough for rescue to arrive. Through her night vision equipment, Sarah could see military patrols moving through the desert in their direction. The soldiers were conducting a systematic search, using vehicles with searchlights to examine every possible hiding place. It was only a matter of time before they found the arroyo. Sarah made a decision that went against every principle of escape and evasion she had been taught. Instead of continuing to run, she would set up a defensive position and fight. "Miguel, I need you to stay here and keep pressure on that IV," Sarah said as she checked her weapons and remaining ammunition. "Don't move unless I tell you to, and whatever happens, keep quiet." "Where are you going?" "To buy us some time." Sarah climbed out of the arroyo and began preparing fighting positions among the rocks and brush. She placed her remaining grenades in strategic locations where they would have maximum effect against approaching vehicles. She also identified several shooting positions that would allow her to engage multiple targets while remaining concealed. Sarah's plan was simple but dangerous. She would allow the first military patrol to pass by their position, then attack the second patrol from behind. This would create confusion and force the army units to assume they were dealing with a larger enemy force. With luck, it would also draw attention away from the area where Miguel was hidden. At 5:43 a.m., the first patrol approached their position. Sarah counted 8 soldiers moving in a standard search formation, with 2 men on point, 4 in the main body, and 2 bringing up the rear. They were well-trained and disciplined, but they were also tired after hours of searching and becoming less alert. Sarah let them pass without making contact, though her finger was on the trigger of her rifle and she could have easily eliminated several of them. But attacking this patrol would reveal her position to other units in the area. The second patrol was larger and included 2 vehicles with mounted weapons. Sarah waited until they were completely committed to searching an area about 300 meters from the arroyo, then began her attack. Her first grenade destroyed the lead vehicle, killing or wounding several soldiers and creating immediate chaos. Sarah followed with accurate rifle fire from a concealed position, dropping 2 more soldiers before they could take cover. The surviving members of the patrol returned fire, but they were shooting at muzzle flashes and had no clear target. Sarah had already moved to a second position and was engaging them from a completely different direction. The firefight lasted less than 5 minutes, but it achieved Sarah's objective. Radio chatter erupted across all frequencies as other army units responded to the contact. Sarah could see vehicles racing toward the engagement area from multiple directions. But instead of pursuing her, the military forces did exactly what Sarah had hoped they would do. They established a defensive perimeter around the area where the attack had occurred and began calling for reinforcements. Sarah had successfully drawn their attention away from Miguel's hiding place. Sarah's phone buzzed with another message from Dr. Vasquez, helicopter inbound. ETA 15 minutes. Be ready for immediate extraction. Sarah smiled grimly as she made her way back toward the arroyo. The most dangerous part of the mission was almost over. In 15 minutes, she and Miguel would be on their way to safety. But as Sarah approached Miguel's position, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Her brother was coughing violently, and she could see blood on his lips. The internal injuries she had suspected were more serious than she had realized. Miguel was dying, and they were still 15 minutes away from medical evacuation. Sarah dropped into the arroyo and immediately began examining Miguel's condition. The blood on his lips was bright red and frothy, indicating internal bleeding in his lungs. His breathing was becoming increasingly labored, and his pulse was weak and irregular. Without immediate medical intervention, Miguel would not survive another hour. "Stay with me," Sarah whispered as she prepared an injection of epinephrine to help stabilize his vital signs. "The helicopter is coming. Just hold on for a few more minutes." Miguel tried to speak, but could only manage a weak whisper. "Sarah, thank you for coming for me. I'm sorry I got us into this." "Don't talk like that," Sarah said firmly as she administered the medication. "You're going to be fine. You're going to recover and go back to taking pictures and exposing the truth. That's what Mom and Dad would have wanted." But even as she spoke the encouraging words, Sarah knew Miguel's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The months of captivity, malnutrition, and abuse had taken a devastating toll on his body. The rescue operation might have come too late. Sarah used every medical technique she knew to stabilize Miguel's condition. She adjusted his IV fluids, monitored his breathing, and positioned him to reduce pressure on his injured ribs. But without proper equipment and a surgical team, there was only so much she could do in the field. In the distance, Sarah could hear the sound of approaching aircraft. But it wasn't just the rescue helicopter. Military aircraft were also converging on the area, probably responding to the firefight she had initiated with the Army patrol. The extraction was going to be more complicated than planned. Sarah's phone rang. It was Dr. Vasquez. "Sarah, the pilot is having trouble reaching your position. There are military helicopters in the area and he's afraid of being shot down. Can you move to a different pickup point?" Sarah looked at Miguel, who was now unconscious and breathing with great difficulty. He can't be moved. He'll die if we try to transport him without proper medical support. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The pilot says he can try to reach you, but it will be extremely dangerous. If the military helicopters engage him, you'll all be killed. Tell him to come, Sarah said without hesitation. We're out of options. Sarah could now see lights in the sky as various aircraft circled the area. The military forces were establishing an aerial perimeter while continuing their ground search. Getting a civilian helicopter into this airspace would be like threading a needle while blindfolded. Sarah prepared for the extraction by gathering all their equipment and positioning Miguel for rapid loading. She also set up her rifle in case she needed to provide covering fire during the pickup. The helicopter would be vulnerable for several minutes while landing and loading passengers. At 6:18 a.m., Sarah heard the distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching from the east. It was flying low and fast, using the terrain to mask its approach from military radar. The pilot was clearly experienced in dangerous operations. But as the helicopter approached their position, Sarah heard another sound that made her heart sink. Military aircraft were also moving in their direction, probably vectoring on the rescue helicopter's engine noise. The rescue helicopter appeared over the rim of the arroyo just as two Mexican Army helicopters crested a ridge about 2 kilometers away. Sarah could see that it was going to be very close timing. "This is Angel Flight," came a voice over Sarah's radio. "I see your position. Prepare for immediate pickup. We have about 30 seconds before company arrives." The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris. Sarah lifted Miguel's unconscious form and ran toward the aircraft, struggling with his weight and her own equipment. The pilot was shouting something about military aircraft, but Sarah couldn't hear him over the noise of the rotors. As Sarah reached the helicopter, she could see the military aircraft approaching rapidly. They would be within weapons range in less than a minute. The rescue helicopter's pilot was already pulling pitch, preparing to take off before Sarah had even finished loading Miguel. "Wait!" Sarah shouted as she struggled to get Miguel into the cabin. "I need a few more seconds." The pilot looked back and saw the military helicopters approaching. "We need to go now or we're all dead." Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She pushed Miguel into the helicopter and stepped back. "Take him to Dr. Vasquez's clinic," she shouted over the engine noise. "I'll find another way out." "What? No!" the pilot yelled back. "Get in the helicopter!" But Sarah was already backing away from the aircraft. "Go! Get him medical attention." The helicopter lifted off just as the first military aircraft came within visual range. Sarah watched as the rescue pilot banked hard to the east, flying barely above ground level to avoid detection. Within seconds, the aircraft disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah was alone again, but this time she had accomplished her primary mission. Miguel was safe and on his way to medical care. Whatever happened to her now was secondary to that success. The military helicopters circled the area for several minutes before landing nearby. Sarah could hear soldiers disembarking and beginning a ground search. She had perhaps 10 minutes before they found her hiding place in the arroyo. Sarah quickly destroyed any evidence of Miguel's presence, including medical supplies and the IV equipment. She then gathered her weapons and prepared for one final engagement. But as Sarah climbed out of the arroyo, she was surprised by what she saw. The military forces weren't searching for her. They were focused on the ranch compound, where several buildings were now burning. It appeared that the army was treating this as a successful raid against cartel forces, not a rescue operation. Sarah realized she had a chance to escape if she moved carefully and avoided contact with the military patrols. Her truck was still hidden at the old mining site, and if she could reach it, she might be able to drive back across the border. The journey back to her vehicle took 3 hours of careful movement across desert terrain. Sarah had to avoid several army patrols and wait out a helicopter search that passed directly overhead. But her military training served her well, and she reached the truck without being detected. As Sarah drove away from the area, she allowed herself to feel relief for the first time in months. Miguel was alive and safe. The cartel soldiers who had kidnapped him were dead. The mission had been successful despite the enormous risks and complications. Sarah's phone rang as she approached the border. It was Dr. Vasquez. "Miguel is stable," the doctor reported. He has serious injuries that will require surgery, but he's going to survive. The pilot says you saved his life by getting him medical treatment when you did." Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks as she absorbed the news. "Thank you for helping us. I couldn't have done this without you." "What will you do now?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "The authorities will be looking for whoever attacked the ranch. It might not be safe for you to return to your normal life." Sarah had been thinking about the same question during her drive north. The gentle nurse who had worked in the pediatric ward was gone, probably forever. The events of the past day had awakened something inside her that could never be put back to sleep. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "But I know I can't go back to my old life. Too much has changed." Sarah crossed the border just as the sun was rising over the desert mountains. Behind her lay the scene of violence and death that had been necessary to save her brother. Ahead lay an uncertain future, in which she would have to decide who she wanted to be. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood at Miguel's hospital bedside as he prepared for discharge. Her brother had made a remarkable recovery, though he would carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of his life. The doctors said his survival was a miracle considering the severity of his injuries and the conditions of his captivity. "What are your plans?" Miguel asked as a nurse helped him with his discharge paperwork. "I've been offered a job with a private security company," Sarah replied. "They need someone with my particular skills to help rescue kidnapping victims and provide protection for journalists working in dangerous areas." Miguel nodded approvingly. "You'll be saving people like me. That's the idea." Sarah paused. "I also got word that the Sangre Nueva cartel has been completely destroyed. The Mexican army used our raid as justification for a major operation against their leadership. The men who kidnapped you are all dead or in prison." "Good," Miguel said with surprising vehemence. "They destroyed so many families. They deserved what they got." Sarah looked at her brother and realized that the experience had changed him as well. The gentle photojournalist had been replaced by someone harder and more determined to expose the truth about cartel violence. "Will you go back to journalism?" Sarah asked. "Yes, but I'll be more careful. And I'll focus on stories that can help stop people like the ones who kidnapped me." Miguel stood up slowly, still favoring his injured ribs. "We both learned something important during this ordeal. Sometimes the only way to protect innocent people is to be willing to fight evil directly." Sarah nodded, understanding that they had both crossed a line from which there was no return. The nurse and the journalist were gone, replaced by warriors in a battle between good and evil that would continue for the rest of their lives. As they left the hospital together, Sarah thought about the children in the pediatric ward who would no longer have her gentle care and comforting presence. She felt sadness about leaving that life behind, but no regret about the choices she had made. Sometimes saving one life required taking others. Sometimes protecting the innocent required becoming something dark and dangerous. Sarah had made peace with these contradictions. The nurse sniper had been born from necessity, forged in violence, and tempered by the love between siblings who would never abandon each other. Whatever the future held, Sarah knew she would face it with the same determination and skill that had brought Miguel home alive. In the distance, the desert stretched endlessly toward mountains that marked the border between two countries and two worlds. Behind them lay the evidence of what people would do to save the ones they loved. Ahead lay the promise of new missions, new rescues, and new opportunities to stand between evil and the innocent. Sarah Martinez had found her true calling at last. She was no longer just a nurse or just a sniper. She was something new and necessary in a world where good people sometimes needed a guardian angel with deadly skills and an unbreakable will. The transformation was complete. The mission was just beginning.